So yes, my name is Vima Punde, and today the Leeds Medicinal Research and Development Society have asked me to represent them in this webinar titled The Future of Virtual Reality and Enabling Technologies in Medicine and Healthcare on their behalf. Our special guest today is David Wortley, who is the Vice President of the International Society of Digital Medicine and is also a digital health practitioner who will cover the following topics: training and education, pain management, mental health, which will include stress management and dementia, rehabilitation therapy, diagnostics, remote surgery, virtual hospital tours and navigation, as well as immersive learning quizzes. The Leeds Medicinal Research and Development Society are honoured to collaborate with two other societies, so MedTech Warwick and MedTech Manchester, and I will now pass you on to them to introduce themselves. So we'll start off with MedTech Manchester. Please introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, thank you so much for having us to the Leeds MR&D Society. I hope you're all doing well. So my name is Aisha and I'm the co-president of the Manchester MedTech Society. We're a new society that's formed this year and we aim to inspire and engage students with the field of medical technology. So if you'd be interested in this and attending our future events, then please do like our Facebook and Instagram pages. And I hope that you'll find this event interesting today. So I'll pass on to David from Warwick to introduce himself.
Thank you, Aisha. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. I'm David from the Warwick Surgical MedTech Group. We are focusing on developing internships and innovation programs on health tech, specifically in the Warwick Coventry area. We also have got a virtual talk on COVID coming up on the 27th. If you are interested, feel free to check us out on our social platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I hope you enjoy this. And with no further ado, I'll pass it to David.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's an honor to be talking to you today. I've been looking forward to doing a presentation. As you'll see from my grey hair and balding head, I'm quite a bit older than you are, so I've probably seen a lot more things in my lifetime than you have. And I should explain right from the very beginning that I've been involved in the field of medicine only fairly recently. My area of expertise is in the use of disruptive technologies and their impact on business and society generally. And I became involved in digital medicine, just very briefly, because I wanted to understand how to use technology to better manage my own personal health. I've been fortunate that I've been very healthy throughout my life. I've only ever been in hospital once, and that was when I was at university. I had peritonitis and had to be operated on in Birmingham. But since that time, I've been very healthy. But as I've got older, I put on weight, and the number of comments from some of my friends about the fact that I was a little bit heavier than I should be led me to, for a variety of reasons, to explore the use of wearable technologies to monitor my health, to see whether I could use those technologies to lose some weight and improve my health. So I started that some 7 years ago now, and within 3 months of starting, I'd lost 21 kilos, and my blood pressure and all my vital signs were substantially improved. So since that time, I spend a lot of time developing a network of contacts involved in the use of technology for medicine and healthcare, and this led me to be invited to become a vice president of the International Society of Digital Medicine, which actually was founded in China in 2016. So that's enough by way of introduction. What I'd like to do now is to go straight into a PowerPoint presentation and share some thoughts I've got on virtual reality and enabling technologies in medicine and healthcare. So you should all be seeing my presentation on your screen now. If there's anybody got any problem with seeing my screen, then maybe just type something into chat so that I can be alerted to the fact. So this is an example of the use of HoloLens technology in surgical training. But I want to go back in time and ask you to think about what we actually mean by virtual reality and enabling technologies. Because I warrant, if you're anything like me, sometimes in your childhood, you may well have played doctors and nurses. And some of you may have even had, like this young girl on the left, the uniform and toy tools to go with it. So it would include immersive games and simulations in virtual reality. So virtual reality as a concept is not dependent on technology. Virtual reality is an experience where you are taken out of the immediate world around you and you become part of something else. Whether it's playing a game of doctors and nurses, whether it be playing a video game. If you are totally immersed in that experience, that's an example of virtual reality. So it's not dependent on technology. However, we have technologies today which have led us to the thought that perhaps virtual reality might be limited to the use of virtual reality headsets, where you are using technology to immerse yourself in an environment in a richer and more absorbing way than you can achieve outside of technology. So I want you to bear that in mind as we go through the presentation. So the point is that virtual reality and enabling technologies is not something that is new. And here's some examples of virtual reality and enabling technologies from my own experience as the founding director of the Serious Games Institute at Coventry University. Starting in the top left-hand corner, that's a screenshot from our virtual auditorium at the Serious Games Institute. And you can see someone sat in the auditorium, and that is my avatar. So we developed a virtual world in the platform called Second Life, which you don't really hear anything about these days, but it was very popular back in 2006, 2007. So when we run some of our events, we run them as hybrid events, which took place in the physical world as well as the virtual world. The picture next to it of the guy sat in the armchair, that again is my avatar. And I'm looking at a screen which was developed for the Serious Games Institute. And this was actually a live interview that I did from a worldwide web broadcast, again in Second Life. And in actual fact, when I was delivering this talk and presentation, I was actually sat in my armchair in my flat in Leicester. And I made the mistake of having the television on at the same time as I was doing my presentation, and it was on an occasion when England were playing Serbia in a cup match, it was a little bit distracting. I don't have any of those distractions today, I'll be pleased to say, so you have my undivided attention. The picture next to that one is a young man called Simon Stevens, who is a sufferer of cerebral palsy, as you'll see from his headset. And cerebral palsy is a very debilitating condition, and in Simon Stevens' case, it had a serious effect on his speech. But he's a very intelligent young man, and he used a Second Life virtual world to create his own immersive virtual environment, which was a nightclub, a virtual nightclub called Wheelies. And he would invite people to join him in his virtual nightclub on the condition that they used a virtual wheelchair. So it was a use of technology for him that was a great enabler in being able to demonstrate his intelligence and his entrepreneurship through the use of these technologies. The two bottom screens are other examples of how the video games industry has lent its skills to virtual reality and medical applications. On the bottom screen, the picture of the two guys, there is an application called Dying Dave, and it was used to create a simulation of what it was like to see a person dying of a head wound over a period of 5 minutes. So on the left-hand side, you'll see what the guy looks like in normal practice, and on the right-hand side, you'll see as he deteriorates what his visual appearance is. And in the top corner, there are some vital signs monitored so that you can see how they deteriorate over a period of time. So that was taking a technology that came out of the games industry, applying 3D scanning to create something that simulated a real medical situation. And the company involved, TrueSim, also developed a training application to train paramedic surgeons in a virtual environment. So they simulated an explosion in a city centre, and they used it to triage victims of the blasts. I shan't go into a lot of details of that. So just to make the point that these technologies have been used in medical applications, not just recently, but at least 10 or 15 years. So the other thing to take into account is the impact of COVID-19 on digital medicine, because every area of society, whether it's business, whether it's our leisure, whether it's schools, whether it's hospitals, they've all been affected by COVID-19, and everyone is now beginning to take advantage of some of these disruptive enabling technologies to meet the challenges of COVID-19. So what's happening is that COVID-19 crisis and the limitation that it places on our lives have been a real driver for developing these disruptive enabling technologies as a way of addressing some of the challenges. And the webinar that you've organised today is just an example of how one of the disruptive enabling technologies is being used to meet the challenge of education. So what do I mean by disruptive digital enabling technologies in medicine? Well, here's an example. The doctor's medical bag will look like this. When I was a child, it had a thermometer, a stethoscope, and a blood pressure monitor. And of course, over the years that I've been alive, we've seen quite significant developments where a lot of these devices have been given a digital flavor, and so they can not only do the same thing more accurately, but they can also capture this in a digital format, which allows it to be used for a variety of applications and shared with people all around the world. But that is not what I mean by disruptive digital enabling technologies. I want to just talk about some of the technologies which you'll almost certainly be using within your own career development, but it's worth looking at a perspective of where these technologies are coming from and what the impact of these technologies is going to be on medicine and healthcare. And I wrote an article called The Consumerisation of Digital Medicine, which really articulates how I see technology impacting medicine and healthcare in the future. And so here are some examples of consumer technologies. And by consumer technologies, I mean technologies that were not designed specifically by or for the medical profession. So I include things like smartphones, fitness trackers, chat, social media site, virtual reality headsets, panoramic cameras, artificial technology, and sensors. All of these have found their origins mostly outside of the medical profession. And it's people outside the medical profession, as well as people within the medical profession, are finding ways of applying these disruptive technologies to their work. And so what's happening, and I hope this will be helpful to you when you're thinking about the career, because within my lifetime, I've seen a really dramatic shift in the use of technology in a whole range of different areas in business and society. And all of them have the same kind of characteristics. They begin in the early part of my life, in the 1950s, say, where most technologies were developed specifically for a particular application area. So they would be clinician-focused technologies to help with diagnosis and treatment. They will be managed by clinicians, and the technologies involved would tend to be proprietary. In other words, they were only intended for one purpose. They were not intelligent. They tended to be isolated in the sense that the results of those technologies could not be shared, and that the technology was proprietary rather than general. So in the period of my lifetime, we've seen how technologies have moved from being these proprietary, dumb, island, silo technologies toward being more generic, smart, connected, collaborative technologies. And so what's happening is that we are seeing a shift in the medical profession, in my opinion, away from clinician-managed health towards citizens becoming more and more involved in the management of their own health. And this is actually extremely important if we are to have a sustainable national health service in the coming years. So here are some examples of the kind of technologies that I'm talking about and their medical applications. We're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, including robotic surgery. We're talking about training technologies such as this laparoscopic surgery training tool that you can see in the top right. We're talking about virtual reality and how that might be used in pain control, wearable devices. We're talking about the Internet of Things, 360-degree imaging, videos, virtual reality, 3D printing and modeling to allow us to print exact reproductions of medical organs, and social media. All of these are quite disruptive. And I'd like to use the example of the laparoscopic surgery training tool in the top right-hand corner, just to make a point, to give you some thought about how that might impact jobs in the future. What you see there is a lady who's using this laparoscopic surgery tool, and she's on the screen. She is seeing what a surgeon would see if they were removing a gallstone. So the idea behind this training tool was that you use the tools that an actual surgeon would use, using haptic feedback, so that you get the same sensation and feeling using the tool as a surgeon would have performing the operation. And you watch it on a screen, which is how a lot of surgical operations are carried out these days. And the idea behind this tool is that you could practice laparoscopic surgery, removing gallstones, and you were evaluated by the technology in terms of the speed with which you were able to perform the operation and the efficiency and the lack of damage that you caused by being able to control the laparoscopic tools properly. Now, the point about this training tool is that the lady who is using it is actually my partner. And we were together in Kuala Lumpur at a conference on healthcare technologies, and this was in the exhibition area. And so my partner really has no interest in video games, very little interest in technology. She's not a games player, but she was able to perform a laparoscopic surgery with a greater degree of precision and speed than a lot of trainee surgeons, which raises the question of when you are training, if you want to be a surgeon, how much of that practice is going to be determined by your medical knowledge and how much is going to be determined by other skills that may be have nothing to do with medical training, like games playing, for example. And so next to it, you see an example of robotic surgery. So it's just something to think about when you're thinking about how technologies are going to disrupt the skills and tools that are going to be used in the jobs in the future. So very kindly in the introduction, these are the things that I want to talk about in my presentation, and I'll just go through them relatively quickly with some examples. Training and education is an obvious example, and you're going to be joined by Steve Dunn, who's one of the co-founders of a company called Medical Realities based in London. Now, they're one of the not just leaders in the UK, but world leaders in the use of virtual reality for medical training. And some of that comes from the other co-founder, which is Professor Shafi Ahmed, who's a famous surgeon who has performed surgical operations live in 360 degrees. So in other words, within the operating theatre, there have been 360-degree cameras doing a live stream of the operation that can be watched by people with virtual reality headsets anywhere in the world. So you're not dependent upon having a video stream to a lecture theatre in a hospital. You could stream these technologies live to anywhere in the world. And so people get the experience of actually being in the operating theatre and being able to look round, not only see what's happening on the operating table, but also to examine the teamwork that goes on behind operations. So you'll learn more about that from Steve Dunn. Another company working with these technologies within the education field is a company called the Original Content Company, working in partnership with Vodafone, and they're taking advantage of an enabling technology, 5G mobile technology, which has been implemented across the campus at Coventry University to allow them to do live interactive virtual reality lectures. And this is a screenshot from one of the lectures, which actually simulates an animation of the processes that happen within the human body. So they really are pushing the boundaries of technology here. And the point about it is that the enabling technology here is not a virtual reality headset. It's actually 5G technology. So mobile phone technology, you need to be able to have a very fast broadband connection to be able to do some of these things. And without that fast connection, you would not be able to have this kind of experience. But again, 5G is an example of a technology that's not primarily developed for medicine. Primarily, I think it's likely to be developed because it's a way of being able to stream high-resolution video movies. So the industry that's driving it is the movie industry and people like Netflix rather than the medical industry. Here's another example from my early days at the Serious Games Institute. This goes back to probably around 2007, 2008. And it's an example of some research that was done to explore whether virtual reality could be used as a tool to support therapy. And it was used to experiment with patients who'd suffered serious burns. These were mainly people from the military. And one of the procedures which is extremely painful, as you're probably aware, is dressing changes with serious burns patients. So what they did was to create a virtual environment called Snow World, which was actually a video game. And the idea was that the patient would wear this virtual reality headset while the nurse changed the dressing. And the patient was then focused on playing the game, which involved knocking snowmen over with snowballs whilst listening to Simon and Garfunkel music at high volume. And so with the sensor technology that scanned the brains while this was going on, they were able to validate the fact that the pain sensations were dramatically reduced with the use of virtual reality. And similar experiments have been done with cancer patients and children, getting them to play video games, not with a VR headset, but just immersive video games. One such game is called Remission, and it was developed by someone who became the research director at the Serious Games Institute. And the idea behind that was that young children could play a game where they zapped cancer cells. And again, the therapeutic benefit of this distraction from the pain and the condition gave patients an understanding or a belief that they had some control over their condition, and this reflected in the recovery rates and the medical benefits that the individuals enjoyed. Mental health is another area where virtual reality is increasingly important, and in the USA, as you probably know, they have something called FDA approval, which is basically a clinical validation of medical devices, and now virtual reality headsets and applications are being clinically validated. Particularly in the area of mental health for things like stress management. And in the current COVID crisis, there are hospitals, as I understand, who have created virtual reality environments as for the clinicians who are involved in the stress of managing seriously ill COVID patients. So in some cases, they are actually in a room which uses projected virtual reality images to place them in a relaxing environment, a meditative environment, or in other cases, they're using a virtual reality headset and they can experience being on a beach or in a relaxing forest, listening to calming music. Other mental health applications are being used to tackle things like phobias, where the technology is used to introduce the patient through the virtual reality headset into the environment where they have a phobia. And by gradually introducing that environment, they are able to manage the person's mental condition and help them to overcome some of their phobias. Rehabilitation therapy is another very big area, and you can see someone in a wheelchair with a VR headset using virtual reality as a way of helping them to exercise and develop their skills. And I hope and aim to have time at the end of my presentation to show you an example of rehabilitation therapy in practice, using technologies that were developed for the games industry, but providing the trained physiotherapists with a way of remotely monitoring the compliance of patients and the performance of patients when they're carrying out their rehabilitation therapy. Increasingly, virtual reality and the ability to overlay data is being used to support diagnostic applications. And this is an example of how it's being used with HoloLens on a real patient. Surgery, I've already mentioned. We are not quite yet at the point where surgeons could reliably operate on a person using a robot surgeon, but the surgeon being in one location and the robot being in the other. Now, at the moment, because of restrictions in the enabling technologies of broadband and connectivity and infrastructure, we are at the moment fairly limited to having a surgeon in a remote location to be able to join the actual surgeon performing the operation and to guide that surgeon through the surgery. So it's a way of transferring expertise remotely through the use of virtual reality headset. But once we get to an environment with ubiquitous 5G and broadband technology everywhere, you can see that in future it is likely to be possible that we could have a surgeon in one country being able to operate on a patient in another country using virtual reality and a robotic surgeon. One of the things that I've done quite a bit of over recent years is to create virtual hospital tours, and I create these through the use of consumer 360-degree video and still image cameras. So these are devices which you can buy from Amazon, which will allow you to capture both images and video in 360 degrees. These are the kinds of technologies that are used by medical realities, and Steve Dunn will tell you about those. But if you want to go to a hospital, you can take images in all of the departments, and you can use those images to create a virtual tour. So people online via the internet can actually navigate around the hospital and go to different departments. They can see what is happening in those departments through recorded 360-degree video. They can have annotations and text explanations with hotspots which explain what the departments are. And so these can be very useful for induction purposes. A new employee at a hospital, for example, wants to know the way around, where the operating theatres are, how the wards are laid out, etc. Then virtual hospital tours are created using consumer technology tools, and they can be created very quickly and easily and made available to anyone. And today, you're not only able to create a virtual tour that someone can log on to via the internet, so they can navigate around themselves, you can also have guided virtual tours, so that whether it's using Zoom or whether it's using the virtual tour tool itself, you can have someone talk you around a virtual tour so that you can ask that person questions, and whilst you're looking around, you can ask them what different parts of the hospital are, where to find different things. So increasingly, these consumer technologies are going to be used for these kinds of applications. This is an example of an application that I developed for an international conference where technology is used to create an immersive quiz. And this quiz can be used to both educate people as well as testing their knowledge. So it can be linked to a learning management system so that you can provide feedback, continuous feedback. I can show some of these examples live, but I want to make sure that I finish on time before I go into some of these other things. So if it's something you want to see or a question comes up about it, then I'm more than happy to show that later on during the Q&A session. One thing I did want to show to you, though, is an example of the use of an immersive environment for neuro-rehabilitation. One thing I did want to show to you, though, is an example of the use of an immersive environment for neuro-rehabilitation. So what I need to do is to quickly load in the background the Neuro-Rehabilitation software. So that's loading in the background. And so I'm going to change the sharing of my screen to show this new Rehabilitation Neuro. So when I go to it, what you will see is the screen that is used at the beginning of this rehabilitation. What it does is it provides tailored therapies which are developed by trained professionals for individuals with neurological problems. So they may be recovering from a stroke, they may have Parkinson's disease, etc. And normally people will have to have this kind of therapy within a clinic. What Rehabilitation Neuro does is allows patients to carry out these exercises at home under the supervision of a therapist. So I'm going to now switch to that screen. So this is what the opening screen of the Rehabilitation Neuro looks like. And what you see on the screen are examples of 3 therapy programs. I set up a little demonstration. So when I select the demonstration David, D. Wortley, and I click on next, what you'll see then is me using a consumer device called the Microsoft Kinect, which was developed for the games industry to control my therapy. So if I click on next,
move until you see your whole
now
body.
you can see on the screen, this is actually, I don't live in an office with a world virtual background. This is actually my office. So I've moved to the back of the office, and now instead of using computer mouse, I'm using my hand. And so I set up the therapy to use my right hand. And so when I move my right hand to select the options, there's naturally a disclaimer.
Welcome
I won't go
back,
into
David.
that because that's in the interest of time. So it knows that I've got a therapy plan, and it's asking me to calibrate, and this is a way of finding my degree of movement. So I try to reach the objects in the corner, and what this does is it calibrates the rehabilitation system so that it doesn't ask me to do something that's physically impossible. So I can reach these other icons in the other corners. I confirm that the calibration is okay.
Calibration okay.
And now I go into the actual rehabilitation. I've got a number of different games that I can play. I want to just show you quickly just a couple. Each of them lasts only 60 seconds. And the first one is called
Choose
Coloured
game's
Cans.
difficulty level.
I can choose a difficulty level, but I'm just going to choose the basic
Move the coloured
level.
can to the correct shelf.
And the idea is, it tells me I've got to move coloured cans onto the correct shelf. So I'm using my hands, as you saw me standing in my office, and now what I've got to do is to pick up a green can, blue can, green can, and all the time I'm using my right hand to control the game. So it gives me not only some exercise which has been tailored by the physiotherapist, it's also continuously monitoring how I'm doing, my arm movements, my degree of movement, my accuracy of movement. All of these things are being monitored in this game. And it's a combination of providing both physical exercise and mental exercise. Because this is the basic level of difficulty, but there are other levels, other levels in which you have to move more different coloured cans, so there are different degrees of complexity. So that's an example of using the right hand. Now I'm going to show you an example of rehabilitation that requires me moving my legs. So the game is loaded, and the idea is that I've got to move my feet to put the correct coloured bag into the correct trash can. So it's a blue one, so I move my foot. Yellow, I move my foot to the side. Green, move it to the side. And you can see it's exercising me. I don't think you can actually see me on the screen with at the same time as this doing the demonstration. It is possible to set up Zoom so that you can see me moving as well as watching the demonstration. This is giving me exercises for my legs as well as my ability to recognize colors and put them in the correct, and it's monitoring, giving me a score. So it's using gamification as a mechanism to give me an incentive to play the game.
Final score,
So
1,300.
I'm not doing so well. Just at the final game now, before I come to towards the close of my presentation, is the ski pass. Now, one of my hobbies in my younger days was skiing. I used to go skiing every year at one time. And so now you'll see that this is where you can see the skier on the ski run. And the idea is that I have to dip below the barriers and also pick up coins by leaning to the side. I'm going to dip down, and if you were able to actually see me on the screen, you'll see that I'm actually leaning to the right and to the left. Missed on that one. Got another one down. Oh. I don't think I'm going to beat my high score this time. So it gives me feedback all the time, tells me how many points I've got. I've got to lean to the left. And dip down. And these games, these therapeutic exercises can be designed and tailored to the conditions of the individual.
Final score, 1,100.
So you can see I could do better. So those are an example of 3 therapy exercises. I'm going to exit from it now. Go back to my presentation. So that was Rehabilitating Neuro. So to finish off my presentation, which is, I still have 5 minutes to go, so I may have a chance to show you something else. These enabling technology and virtual reality, they've got a huge number of potential clinical applications, and these applications can generate operational efficiencies, and they can also engage with citizens in new and exciting ways. They are, though, dependent. It's not just on the technologies that are developed for the medical industry. They're developed on technologies that are developed by outside of the medical industry. As I mentioned, Netflix is an important driver for 5G technologies, for example. Video games are very important for development of simulation applications. And all of these technologies do present challenges to existing medical roles and responsibilities. So what we're seeing today is, if you like, a perfect storm of technologies. And so these are some of the most important technologies, I think, which will influence in the way in which we see things developing in the future. From the top left, we've got 5G, which I've already mentioned. That's something which is essential to some of the training that's going on at Coventry University. You've got virtual reality headsets, which are coming down and down in price, as well as getting to really good levels of reality and sophistication, not just from visual display, but also from the audio quality. We've got wearable technologies, which we are going to see in future going to be embedded into the human bodies, as well as being worn on the skin. That's an example of a sensor which is applied on top of the skin like a plaster. We have GPS and satellite technologies which are able to locate where we are and put things into context. We've got artificial intelligence, which increasingly will be linked to virtual reality to provide feedback and an ability to be able to alter what you experience within virtual reality. And we've got the 360-degree camera technologies, and that's an example of one of the cameras that I use. It's called a Ricoh Theta Z1. That's what I use to take my 360-degree videos and images. I just want very quickly just to show you this. It's called Big Works Medical School. It's really more for a sense of amusement. But what I've done with Big Works is to set up something which will allow you. So I'm going to start from the very beginning. What you should see is a Victorian school, which was pretty much like the school in my hometown. And if I move my cursor onto the screen,
Back to the Future School
you can see a projected image of
a
myself welcoming you to the School of Medicine. Around the walls, I tried to make it like Hogwarts. You see different individuals in picture frames, and they are animated like you would see in Harry Potter. And here's Steve Dunn. So if I click on Steve Dunn,
my background
bring
is
up again a picture frame, and Steve will tell you about himself.
And I got into the sort of
so all around the wall, there are individuals who've done presentations for me at the Giant Health Conference, and some of these are presenters from Facebook, and this is a classroom taken from Victorian times. And if I go around, you can see some other things that were familiar in my childhood as I went to school, pencil sharpeners, for example. And just finally, if you want to see a presentation or presentations in this Big Works Medical School, you can go through, pick up the invisible honours board and discover the presentations that are hidden here. So here's Steve Dunn. It shows that it's on surgical training and live streaming operations. And when I click on that, it plays a YouTube video of Steve Dunn making his presentation. So I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in 1 second after I've gone on to my last slide. So, any questions?
Before I just ask 2 questions from my end, I mean, one of our attendees is asking what kind of equipment does the Neuro-Rehab use? Is it just a simple webcam or are more sensors required?
No, it's not a simple webcam, but in order to be able to do neuro-rehab or any kind of rehab that involves physical movement, you need a device which is able to detect the human body, so it's able to differentiate where your arms are and your hands are, etc. Because I'm not using a mouse or anything else. So in this case, there are 2 particular devices which are used in neuro-rehab. The first one would be used in a clinic. So it's what the physiotherapist would use to set up the exercises for the patient, and that uses a Microsoft Kinect, which was originally developed for the games industry. So many games were developed where people use their hands or their arms within video games, and this has now been, because of its accuracy and its ability to pick out parts of the body and to do things in 3 dimensions, that makes it suitable. But once a physiotherapist has created the game, then it's able to be personalized to the therapy plan is personalized to the individual, and it's actually put onto a different box which the patient can have at home. So that's not a Kinect, it's a different customized box which does something very similar, except that it is tailored to one individual. So there is only one therapy plan on it. So the patient at home just plugs this box into their TV, and it gives them all the capabilities that I've shown you of their therapy plan. and it sends that information back to the physiotherapist to allow them to monitor the results of the therapy plan.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And for those amongst us that might be novices, what do you mean by enabling technologies, and which do you think are most important for healthcare applications?
Well, the enabling technologies are really those technologies that are critical to something working properly. So I mentioned to you before we started the presentation, that I've been involved in virtual conferences for 20 years. And when I started 20 years ago, there wasn't broadband wasn't available. It was a normal, ordinary telephone line, and so that really limited what I could do. So 5G is a good example of enabling technology. It is essential if you're to be able to transfer information quickly enough from a surgeon, for example, working remotely on a patient. So 5G is one example. Artificial intelligence is another example. And what happens is, as time progresses, these technologies mature. And when they are matured, so in other words, they are able to do everything you want them to do, that's when they become really disruptive. Up to that point, they can be problematic because people will not have as satisfactory an experience as they would like.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as the enabling technology goes, I think one of the most critical enabling technologies, I think, is 5G and broadband. Because the virtual reality headsets today, things like the virtual reality headset that I use, they are already mature enough to be able to deliver the right level of experience. But without 5G and broadband, it limits what people can do remotely when they're connecting to other people with virtual reality headsets.
Yeah, definitely. 5G will probably change a lot of things in the healthcare space. Yes. And finally, from me, where do you see the biggest growth areas in the use of virtual reality in medicine and healthcare?
Well, from my perspective, I think one of the most exciting areas is in the area of digital therapeutics. Now, the neuro-rehab is an example of a digital therapeutic, which means that you're using virtual reality not just to train medical professions or to allow them to watch an operation. What you're actually using is an intervention, in the same way that you would prescribe a drug. You prescribe virtual reality and application as an application as a therapy, and this is very important because one of the major clinical issues today are things like comorbidity and conflict between different drugs that are being prescribed, because it's not common knowledge that certainly in the USA and outside of the USA as well, the third largest cause of death is preventable. I won't call them medical errors, because they're not deliberate errors, or they're not negligence. It's things that we don't understand. And so if you're able to avoid things like comorbidity with different drug prescriptions through the use of virtual reality, that's going to make an important contribution.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, from our end, we're sort of working on projects on looking at using virtual reality and perhaps augmented reality to reduce errors in the theatre space. So it's definitely an interesting, yes, space to watch. I'll pass you on to David from Warwick. So he's got a few questions that he would like to ask you. So over to you, David.
Hi, David.
Thank you, V. Hi, David. To build on V's question just now a bit further, we mentioned the biggest growth area in the use of VR. How do you see AI being used in these applications?
I think AI is very important because artificial intelligence is already being used in things like diagnostics. So, for example, the combination of AI and virtual reality in examine scans of patients with cancer. Some of the early results with IBM Watson computer using AI to basically detect whether something is malignant or non-malignant, or pick up a scan has been very important. But where it's starting to move is where you get a connection between AI and virtual reality. So an example, in stress management, or even things like dementia, many rehabilitation therapies depend upon the reaction of the patient to the therapy. For example, if you're talking about stress management, if you have a sensor like the Muse sensor, I don't know whether you're aware about, there is a device called Muse which measures your brain wave. So you wear it just above your glasses, and it measures your brain activity. Now, if you're able to connect that level of activity to what is happening within the virtual reality environment, artificial intelligence will be able to recognize when the patient is distressed and be able to adjust the virtual reality environment accordingly. So I think connecting wearable devices like the Muse device, or skin temperatures, or vital signs monitors to people who are undergoing virtual reality therapy is a way of making sure that the therapy is as effective as possible, because it takes the feedback from the patient and it adjusts the therapy accordingly in ways which are difficult for human beings to do.
Thank you, David. I do agree with what you just said there. I think AI would, as what it is, helps a lot in data management and how we process things. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, how do you think the career in medicine or healthcare will be affected by these technology change?
Well, I think, and this is something that I've heard that Professor Shafi Ahmed articulate himself. He's one of the co-founders of Medical Realities. He's often said that the use of these technologies is going to change medical education and training quite dramatically. Because at the moment, certainly true in my day, a medical student had to have a much longer degree progression than me, for example. I studied electrical engineering. Mine was a 3-year course. Med students had a 5-year course. And then once you have been trained, then you need to have a lot of experience in the field before you become fully qualified. The effect of these technologies, I think, is going to be twofold. First of all, it's going to reduce the amount of time that people need to train, because some of the, if you like, the intelligence required to do a job will be offloaded on and embedded within the technology. The second thing, from a career point of view, is it means that people who are currently what you might call less qualified, will be able to do jobs that are traditionally done by more qualified people. So I see nurses, for example, taking on much greater responsibility, for including beginning to do some of the tasks that will be done by qualified consultants, because they will be supported by artificial intelligence, sensor technologies, a whole range of things, which will mean that the load on the real experts, the high-level consultants, etc., that burden will be reduced, and the lower grade people will be able to take on more responsibility. And also, just a final point on that means that you shouldn't forget that because a lot of these technologies were developed outside of the games industry, you will face competition within the medical profession from people who are not medically trained, using technologies. You know, for example, fitness trainers using wearables and a whole range of technologies that will emerge will take on a responsibility for personal health management that traditionally might be done by doctors.
Thank you, David. And last question from me: how has the COVID-19 affected the use of VR in medicine? Has it been accelerating the process of people implementing the technology, or some other different progression?
Well, I think as far as VR is concerned, COVID-19 really has not had a huge impact on VR technology itself. But it's something because COVID has had an impact on and other enabling technologies, it's basically brought forward the time when VR will become more common in practice. I think what COVID-19 has done is got people used to using technologies like Zoom, but the biggest impact probably has been in the area of telemedicine. And one of the companies that I work with, called Spirit Healthcare in Leicester, they've seen an enormous increase in the amount of business that they're getting, simply because they have a solution which allows, which creates essentially a virtual ward, so that people can be managed in their own homes, where you're able to use real-time medical data that you would normally get in a hospital ward, but implemented within a home environment so that people can be looked after at home.
Thank you very much, David. I'll pass it down to Aisha. That's it for me.
Thank you, David, and thank you, David, for such a incredibly interesting talk. So a question from me, just in terms of the 360 degrees videos and images that you make, what technology is used to actually make those?
Well, I've actually got about 5 or 6 different cameras that I use over a period of time. I'm just going to have a look in my drawer to see if I can find. Yes, I mean this is not a camera that I currently use. Here are 2 cameras that I've used in the past. This is the Samsung camera, 360 degree camera, and this is one from Insta360. I use, at the moment, I use a camera called the Ricoh Theta Z1, which not only captures 360 degree video and audio, but it also captures 360 degree sound. And this camera was developed, I think, primarily for estate agent industry, for people to be able to create virtual tours of properties that to be sold. But I also use another Insta360 called Insta360 1R, and I use also drones. I have a drone, several different drones. The one that I was using yesterday is by Mavic. It's called the Mavic, DJI Mini 2 drone. It's a tiny little drone, but it will allow me to control a drone up to about 2 miles away, and I can take 360 degree panoramic images. So if you go onto my 360 and 360 website, you will find some examples, or even on my Facebook page, some examples of 360 degree images that I've developed there. But for very high level quality work, there are cameras that will allow you to film and stream in 4K resolution, not only in 360 degrees, but also 3D as well.
That's great. That's very, very interesting, and a great use of, I guess, drones as well for this purpose. It's very interesting. So another question is just, what software is actually used to make the interactive hospital tours?
Well, I use a piece of software called 3D Vista Pro, and this costs, I think the version that I cost, which is the top of the range one, it costs about £750. So it's not cheap, but it's incredibly powerful. because it allows me to create these virtual tours in next to no time, and it allows me to publish them as program files, like the Big Warts one that I showed was a Windows program that was created. It allows me to publish them to the internet so that you can access them via the internet, many different ways, and it can link to a learning management system. So 3D Vista Pro is my choice, but there are lots of other different kinds of programs that can be used. I'm sure Steve Dunn will tell you about their software.
Great, thank you. And just last question from me. So how can VR be used in surgery?
Well, VR has two uses in surgery. I mean, currently it's being VR, AR, augmented reality, mixed reality, is being used in surgery. For example, with the HoloLens example, is that when a surgeon is performing an operation, he can have essentially an overlay of a scan of that patient on the actual limb, so that he can see what he's doing inside the limb through the VR glasses as an overlay. So it's an augmented reality type application, and I think in future you will see increasingly the use of VR. So you will have a 360-degree camera, perhaps within the operating theatre, and a surgeon who could be hundreds or even thousands of miles away with a virtual reality headset can essentially be part of the surgical team within that operation and advise the surgeon actually performing the operation.
That's great, thank you. That's very interesting, and there seems to be a huge prospect for VR within medicine and surgery itself as well. And I think that's all for the questions for today. So thank you so much, David, for your hugely interesting talk today. I found it very, very interesting, and I'm sure everyone who's been listening has as well. I'll just pass over to V just to finish off.
Yeah, so so I'd just like to thank you for delivering this webinar. Very interesting presentation, very good examples, and I hope the listeners will be able to take something away from that. And for anyone that's listening that wants to get in touch and get involved, I would suggest you contact either Aisha or David, and then they'll be able to obviously help you along with that. But I'd also like to thank our collaborators as well. MedTech Warwick and MedTech Manchester.
Well, thank you very much, V. And if you can send me, I don't know if it's been recorded on Facebook, but I'd be happy to share the link of any recording on Facebook with my network. Just so thank you again. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you today, and if I can help any further with any of your other events, just please let me know.